You can dismiss a quiet man in a single meeting, but you can never predict the moment his character will become everyone else's greatest lesson. The rain had just begun to fall across downtown Seattle when the executive boardroom of Sterling Dynamics filled with uneasy silence. Beyond the towering glass walls, gray clouds drifted over the skyline while traffic crawled through the wet streets below. Inside the room, every chair around the polished walnut conference table was occupied by senior executives, department directors, and board members waiting for the quarterly restructuring announcement. At the far end of the room stood Victoria Sterling, a 38-year-old white American billionaire chief executive officer whose calm confidence had helped transform the company into one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the country. She reviewed the final page of her presentation before lifting her eyes toward the people who trusted her leadership. Sitting quietly halfway down the table was Ethan Walker, a 39-year-old white American single father whose reputation inside the engineering division had always been simple. He arrived early, solved difficult problems without seeking attention, and left every evening in time to have dinner with his 11-year-old son, Noah. Most executives barely noticed him. To them, he was simply another experienced systems architect whose name rarely appeared in company newsletters or shareholder meetings. Victoria closed her tablet and folded her hands together. Today we are making difficult decisions that will position Sterling Dynamics for the future, she said with steady professionalism. Several employees exchanged nervous glances. Budget reductions had been rumored for weeks, but no one knew whose career would change before the morning ended. Victoria continued reading from the prepared list until her eyes reached one final name. Ethan Walker. Ethan calmly looked up. Your position has been eliminated effective immediately. The words settled across the room like heavy rain against the windows. No one spoke. Ethan remained perfectly still for a brief moment before giving a respectful nod. I understand, he answered quietly. There was no argument, no accusation, no attempt to defend himself. He simply reached for the small notebook beside his laptop and closed it carefully before placing it inside a worn leather messenger bag. One board member looked surprised by his composure. Another avoided making eye contact altogether. Victoria watched Ethan with quiet curiosity. She had expected disappointment, perhaps even frustration. Instead, she saw only quiet dignity. Ethan stood, thanked the people nearest him for the opportunity to work alongside them, and walked toward the conference room door, carrying nothing except his bag and a small framed photograph of himself and Noah standing beside a mountain lake during a summer camping trip. The image caught Victoria's attention for only a second before she turned back to the remaining agenda. Outside the boardroom, Noah waited on a leather bench in the reception area because school had dismissed early for a teacher conference. The boy smiled the moment he saw his father. Are you ready to go home? Noah asked. Ethan returned the smile just as warmly. I am. Noah noticed the framed photograph in his father's hand. Did something happen? Ethan rested a gentle hand on his son's shoulder as they walked together toward the elevators. Sometimes life changes faster than we expect, he said softly. But the important things are still waiting for us at home. The elevator doors closed, carrying father and son quietly toward the lobby, while, several floors above them, a tiny green indicator on one of Sterling Dynamics' primary monitoring screens slowly changed to yellow, and no one inside the executive boardroom noticed the first silent warning that everything they believed was under control had already begun to unravel. The steady rain followed Ethan and Noah all the way home, washing the streets of Seattle beneath a gray afternoon sky that seemed quieter than usual. Neither of them hurried. Ethan drove the familiar route through neighborhoods lined with maple trees, stopping at every traffic light with the same patience he had shown inside the boardroom only an hour earlier. Noah sat beside him holding the framed family photograph that his father had carried out of Sterling Dynamics. He looked at the picture for a long moment before speaking. Will everything be different now? Ethan kept his eyes on the road and smiled gently. Some things will change, he answered, but the most important things will stay exactly the same. Noah looked toward him. Like what? Ethan reached across the center console for just a second and squeezed his son's shoulder. You and me having dinner together tonight. Noah smiled, and for the first time since leaving the company, the silence inside the truck felt peaceful instead of uncertain. Several miles away, inside Sterling Dynamics, the atmosphere had begun to change. The small yellow warning indicator that no one noticed earlier slowly multiplied across several monitoring screens inside the operations center. Engineers glanced at one another before opening diagnostic dashboards. The company processed millions of customer transactions every day, and small delays were not unusual, but this pattern felt different. Daniel Brooks, the chief technology officer, walked briskly into the room carrying a tablet filled with performance reports. "Talk to me," he said calmly. One senior engineer pointed toward the largest display. "Response times are increasing across multiple services." Daniel frowned. "Server utilization? Normal. Network traffic? Normal. Storage? Normal." Daniel studied the numbers more carefully. Everything appeared healthy, yet customers were beginning to experience noticeable delays. It was as though every system inside the company had decided to slow down together without leaving a clear explanation behind. Upstairs, Victoria Sterling had already moved on to the next executive meeting. Quarterly forecasts, investor presentations, and expansion plans filled the agenda. Halfway through the discussion, her assistant quietly entered the room and placed a note beside her laptop. Victoria read it quickly before looking toward the room. "Minor technical issue," she said. "Daniel has everything under control." The meeting continued without interruption. Back at the small suburban home where Ethan and Noah lived, the evening routine remained almost unchanged. Ethan prepared grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, while Noah finished his homework at the kitchen table. The familiar sounds of rain tapping against the windows mixed with the gentle hum of the dishwasher. After several quiet minutes, Noah looked up from his notebook. "Do you think they will fix whatever is happening?" Ethan placed 2 bowls on the table before answering. "They have many talented people." Noah stirred his soup thoughtfully. "But you're not there anymore." Ethan smiled with quiet humility. "A good company should never depend on just one person." Noah nodded, although he was not completely convinced. At that same moment, another alert appeared inside the operations center. Customer support lines began receiving more calls than usual. A financial institution reported delayed transaction confirmations. A healthcare client experienced unexpected processing queues. Daniel watched the dashboards carefully as engineers launched additional diagnostics. Every subsystem continued reporting healthy status. Nothing appeared broken, yet nothing behaved the way it should. Hundreds of highly trained professionals searched through millions of lines of data, but every answer seemed to lead them farther away from the real problem. Noah quietly folded his napkin after dinner and reached for a pencil lying beside his homework. Without saying anything, he drew several small circles connected by simple lines. Ethan glanced at the sketch with mild curiosity. "What are you thinking about?" Noah looked at the drawing for another moment before answering. "Maybe everyone is looking at the wrong place." Ethan studied the paper more carefully, and for the first time that day, a faint expression of thoughtful surprise appeared across his face. The following morning arrived beneath the same blanket of gray clouds, but the atmosphere inside Sterling Dynamics had changed completely. The calm confidence that usually filled the headquarters had been replaced by quiet urgency as every monitor in the operations center displayed longer queues and growing delays. Engineers moved quickly between workstations while large digital dashboards refreshed. Every few seconds, each update creating more questions than answers. Daniel Brooks stood in front of the largest screen with his sleeves rolled up, reviewing reports that refused to make sense. "Run another verification on the authentication services," he instructed. "Already completed," one engineer replied. "Everything is reporting healthy." "Check the database clusters again." "Healthy." "Network latency?" "Normal." Daniel folded his arms and stared silently at the numbers. Every critical component appeared to be operating exactly as designed, yet customer requests continued piling up faster than the system could process them. It was like watching traffic come to a complete stop, even though every traffic light remained green. Upstairs, Victoria Sterling listened as her executive assistant entered the conference room, carrying another update. The Pacific Horizon Financial Group has requested an immediate status meeting, the assistant said. Victoria thanked her and excused herself from the board discussion. Minutes later, she joined Daniel through a secure video conference. "Tell me we know what is happening," she said with controlled determination. Daniel hesitated for only a moment. "We know the symptoms. We do not know the cause." Victoria remained composed, but the answer settled heavily between them. Pacific Horizon represented one of Sterling Dynamics' largest enterprise clients, and every delayed transaction increased the possibility of losing years of trust. "How much time do we have?" she asked. Daniel glanced toward another monitor where customer support requests continued climbing. "Not much." Meanwhile, across town, Ethan sat at the dining room table updating his resume while Noah finished a science assignment nearby. The television in the living room quietly reported heavy rain, traffic congestion, and local business headlines. Ethan remained focused on his work until Noah pushed aside his homework and looked again at the simple sketch he had drawn the previous evening. Instead of circles and lines, he began drawing small intersections connected by roads. Ethan noticed the new diagram. "Still thinking about the company?" Noah nodded. "You always told me computers have to wait their turn sometimes." Ethan smiled. "That is true." Noah picked up 2 pencils and placed them across the paper like tiny barriers. "What if nothing is broken? What if everybody is waiting for permission that never comes?" Ethan leaned forward slightly. The question sounded almost too simple, yet something about it immediately captured his attention. Noah continued arranging the pencils. "If cars are waiting at every intersection because nobody changes the traffic lights, the roads are still fine. The cars just keep waiting." Ethan looked carefully at the drawing without speaking. Years of engineering experience quietly surfaced in his thoughts as he compared Noah's analogy with the architecture he had once designed. Across the city, Daniel received another alarming report. Transaction queues had doubled during the past hour, even though processors remained under half capacity. One frustrated engineer shook his head. "We keep replacing parts that are already working." Daniel slowly turned toward the screen, displaying thousands of pending requests, and repeated Noah's unseen observation without realizing it. "Maybe we were looking at the wrong place." At that exact moment, Ethan lowered his eyes to the child's drawing one more time, and an old memory about the original design of Sterling Dynamics' authorization framework returned with remarkable clarity, leaving him suddenly uncertain whether the company was chasing a problem that had never actually existed. Ethan sat quietly at the kitchen table long after Noah had gone upstairs to finish his homework, staring at the simple drawing that now rested beside an empty coffee mug. The sketch looked almost childish, with a handful of roads, intersections, and tiny arrows drawn in pencil. Yet the longer he studied it, the more familiar it became. Years earlier, when Sterling Dynamics was still a young company with only a few dozen employees, he had designed its authorization framework using almost the same traffic analogy to explain how requests moved safely through the system. The roads had never been the problem. The traffic lights decided who could move and who had to wait. Ethan leaned back in his chair and quietly whispered to himself, "It cannot be that simple." Noah walked back into the kitchen, carrying a math workbook, and noticed his father still looking at the drawing. "Did I make a mistake?" he asked. Ethan smiled warmly. "No, you reminded me of something I have not thought about in a very long time." Noah sat beside him. "If everybody is checking the roads, who checks the traffic lights?" Ethan looked at his son for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes nobody does, because everyone assumes they are working." At Sterling Dynamics, Daniel Brooks stood before another emergency meeting with exhausted engineers who had spent nearly 20 straight hours searching through logs and performance reports. Coffee cups covered nearly every desk, and large monitors continued displaying growing queues of pending requests. One engineer spoke first. "We replaced virtual machines. Nothing changed." Another added, "We shifted workloads to different clusters. Still no improvement." A third engineer sighed quietly. "Every health report says the system is fine." Daniel walked toward the central display and remained silent for several seconds. He had learned during his career that the most dangerous technical problems were often the ones that appeared healthy on the surface. His phone suddenly vibrated. The reception desk had forwarded a message that Ethan Walker had requested permission to collect one personal storage box left in his former office. Daniel looked at the notification without speaking. He remembered Ethan's calm expression during the termination meeting and felt an unexpected sense of regret. "Tell security to let him in," Daniel said. "There is no reason to make today harder than it already is." Less than an hour later, Ethan entered the familiar lobby with Noah walking quietly beside him. Employees who recognized him offered polite smiles, uncertain whether they should say anything more. Ethan greeted each person with the same kindness he had always shown before heading toward the elevator. Noah glanced through the glass wall that overlooked the operations center. Dozens of engineers moved quickly between screens, their faces marked by concentration rather than panic. "They still have not fixed it," Noah whispered. Ethan followed his son's gaze, but said nothing. As the elevator doors opened on the engineering floor, Daniel happened to step into the hallway, carrying another stack of printed reports. Their eyes met for the first time since the restructuring meeting. Daniel offered a respectful nod. "I'm sorry about what happened yesterday." Ethan returned the gesture with quiet grace. "Thank you." Noah looked from one man to the other before speaking with innocent confidence. "My dad thinks everybody is checking the wrong thing." Daniel paused in mid-step. "What do you mean?" Noah held up the folded sheet of paper with his traffic drawing. "I think the traffic lights are making all the cars wait." Daniel stared at the sketch for several silent seconds. Behind him, another engineer hurried into the hallway. "Daniel," the cues just doubled again. Daniel looked back at Noah, then at Ethan, weighing urgency against convention. Finally, he made a decision that surprised even himself. "Would you both come with me?" he asked quietly. "If I can give experienced engineers another 5 minutes to test another theory, I can certainly give one thoughtful young man the same opportunity." Daniel led Ethan and Noah through the glass doors of the operations center, where dozens of engineers paused just long enough to notice the unexpected visitors before returning to their screens. The room carried the steady hum of cooling fans, keyboards, and quiet conversations that had continued almost without interruption since the previous afternoon. Massive displays covered the walls, each filled with charts, response times, processing queues, and health indicators that stubbornly insisted everything was functioning normally. Victoria Sterling stepped into the room only moments later after being informed that Daniel had invited Ethan back into the engineering floor. Her expression revealed both surprise and concern. "Daniel," she said evenly, "please tell me we are making progress." Daniel glanced toward Noah before answering. "I think we may finally have a different question." Victoria looked at the 11-year-old boy standing beside his father. "A different question?" Daniel nodded. "Every engineer here has been trying to discover what is broken. He thinks nothing is broken." Several people exchanged uncertain looks. Noah swallowed quietly as dozens of adults turned toward him. Ethan knelt beside his son and spoke softly enough that only Noah could hear. "You are not here to impress anyone. Just explain what you see." Noah nodded, took a slow breath, and walked toward the large digital display. Daniel handed him a marker and pulled a portable whiteboard into the center of the room. Noah drew several small boxes connected by arrows before adding tiny circles between them. "Imagine these are cars," he began. "The roads are the computer systems. The intersections are where each car has to wait before it keeps driving." One engineer folded his arms politely. "We understand cues." Noah smiled respectfully. "Then imagine every traffic light is still getting electricity, every bulb still works, and every road is open." He paused before drawing one final square. "But the timer that tells the light when a change gets stuck." The room became noticeably quieter. Noah continued pointing at the drawing. "The cars never crash. The roads never close. Everything looks healthy. The only problem is that nobody ever gets permission to move." Daniel stared at the whiteboard without blinking. He slowly turned toward the engineering team. "Show me authorization wait times instead of server response times." Fingers immediately raced across keyboards. One engineer opened a dashboard that nobody had examined since the crisis began because the authorization service itself had continued reporting perfect health. Another engineer created a graph showing how long requests waited before receiving approval. The room fell completely silent as a bright red line climbed almost straight upward. "Daniel," one analyst whispered, "authorization latency has increased almost 1,000%. Another engineer looked shocked. The service never failed. It just stopped releasing requests fast enough. Daniel immediately issued new instructions. Isolate the authorization scheduler. Bypass the stalled timer. Route requests through the secondary approval cycle. Commands echoed across the room. Monitors refreshed almost simultaneously. Within seconds, the massive queues stopped growing. Within another minute, they began shrinking. Customer response times dropped steadily across every dashboard. Phones that had been ringing without pause suddenly became quiet. One by one, green indicators returned across the operations center. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The room simply stood in respectful silence as hundreds of professionals watched an 11-year-old boy's simple drawing solve the mystery that had defeated every advanced diagnostic tool in the building. Victoria looked from the recovering dashboards to Noah, then toward Ethan, whose expression showed neither pride nor surprise, only the calm satisfaction of seeing his son think carefully and kindly. Daniel slowly lowered the marker, still resting in his hand, before asking the question that had suddenly become more important than every technical report on his desk. "Ethan," he said quietly, "who first taught him to see systems this way?" Ethan looked at Daniel with the same quiet expression he had carried throughout the entire day, then glanced toward Noah, who was still standing beside the whiteboard with a marker resting loosely in his hand. "I never taught him to memorize answers," Ethan replied calmly. "I only taught him to ask better questions." The words settled over the operations center with unexpected weight. Around them, engineers continued monitoring the recovering systems. But the frantic energy that had filled the room only minutes earlier had disappeared. Green indicators steadily replaced the warning messages across every display, while customer response times returned to normal, one graph at a time. Daniel nodded slowly before turning toward one of the senior engineers. "Pull every archived design document related to the authorization framework," he instructed. "I want to know exactly how this system was originally built." The engineer immediately opened the company's digital archive and began searching through technical records dating back more than a decade. Thousands of files appeared on the screen. Daniel filtered the results until one original architecture document surfaced, carrying a date from the earliest years of Sterling Dynamics. He opened the file and silently studied the title page before his eyes widened. At the bottom of the document, beneath the original system diagrams and engineering notes, appeared a single signature: Ethan Walker. Daniel scrolled farther through the archive. Design after design, revision after revision, optimization after optimization, all carried the same name. The authorization framework that had protected millions of transactions every day had not been created by an outside consulting firm or a famous industry expert. It had been quietly designed by the man who had walked out of the boardroom, carrying nothing except a photograph of his son. Victoria stepped closer to the monitor, reading the documents for herself. "Why was I never told this?" she asked softly. One of the company's longest-serving engineering managers answered with visible hesitation. "Because he never talked about it. Whenever anyone praised the architecture, he always redirected the credit to the team." Daniel continued reviewing Ethan's employment history. Promotion offers appeared throughout the record, each politely declined. Invitations to executive leadership programs had been refused. Opportunities to relocate to larger offices in California and New York had all received the same respectful answer. Family responsibilities. Victoria looked toward Ethan with growing disbelief. "You turned down every promotion?" Ethan nodded. "After my wife passed away, Noah needed stability more than I needed another title." Noah lowered his eyes, quietly listening as though he had never fully understood those choices himself. Ethan smiled gently at his son, before continuing. There are moments in life when success is measured by what you build at work. There are other moments when success is measured by who is waiting for you at home. The operations center became completely silent. Even the engineers who had never met Ethan before found themselves looking at him with a different kind of respect. Daniel closed the archive and slowly exhaled. We spent almost 2 days trying to understand a system that you designed years ago. Ethan answered without the slightest hint of pride. Technology changes. Principles usually do not. Victoria looked through the glass wall toward the executive floor, where she had confidently announced the restructuring only yesterday. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she questioned not a business strategy, but her own judgment of another human being. She had studied financial reports, organizational charts, and productivity metrics before making her decision, yet none of those documents had revealed the quiet character of the man standing before her. None of them had measured the evenings he protected for his son, or the humility that had kept him from claiming recognition for work that continued serving the company long after everyone had forgotten its creator. As another operations dashboard refreshed with every indicator now glowing green, Victoria realized that the greatest value Sterling Dynamics had nearly lost was never recorded on a balance sheet, and the deepest lesson she had learned that week had not come from a boardroom, an investor, or a financial report, but from a quiet father whose greatest achievement had never been building extraordinary technology, but raising a son who had learned to see the world with wisdom before ambition. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside Sterling Dynamics no longer felt like a company recovering from a technical crisis. It felt like a place quietly reflecting on a mistake that no software update could erase. Employees moved through the hallways with calmer expressions, but conversations had changed. Instead of discussing dashboards and response times, people spoke softly about Ethan Walker, the engineer whose name had almost disappeared from the company only 1 day earlier. Some remembered how he had patiently helped new employees without expecting recognition. Others recalled that he was always the last person to speak during meetings and the first to offer assistance whenever a difficult problem appeared. The more they remembered, the more one question echoed silently throughout the building. How? Had they overlooked someone who had quietly carried so much of the company's foundation? Victoria Sterling stood alone for several minutes inside her office, looking through the floor-to-ceiling windows toward the Seattle skyline. The rain had finally stopped, and thin rays of afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long reflections across the glass towers surrounding headquarters. Her desk remained covered with financial reports, performance summaries, and restructuring plans, yet none of them seemed important anymore. Every document measured revenue, efficiency, and growth, but not one had measured integrity, humility, or quiet leadership. She slowly closed the folder containing Ethan's termination paperwork before walking toward the executive conference room. Daniel Brooks had already gathered the senior leadership team along with department managers. The room fell completely silent as Victoria entered. Ethan and Noah stood near the doorway, having been asked to remain for one final conversation before leaving. Victoria stopped at the head of the table but did not immediately speak. Instead, she looked directly at Ethan, allowing the silence to say what words alone never could. Finally, she took a slow breath. "Yesterday, I believed I was making the best decision for this company," she said steadily. "Today, I understand that I judge performance without fully seeing character, contribution, or sacrifice." No one interrupted her. "Ethan," she continued, "I dismissed a man whose work has protected this company for years and whose example has quietly shaped the people around him. For that, I am sincerely sorry." The apology filled the room with a deeper silence than any celebration could have created. Every executive understood how rare it was for a chief executive officer to accept responsibility publicly without excuses or conditions. Ethan looked at Victoria with calm eyes and offered a gentle nod. "Thank you," he replied. "It takes courage to admit when we have been wrong." Victoria lowered her head slightly before continuing. "I hope you can forgive both my decision and the way it affected your family." Ethan glanced toward Noah, who's quiet. Smile reflected neither resentment nor triumph. Holding on to bitterness never helps anyone move forward, Ethan answered. My son has taught me that every difficult moment is also an opportunity to become a better person. Daniel quietly smiled at those words. Around the table, several executives lowered their eyes, recognizing that the greatest lesson of the week had come not from a corporate strategy session, but from the quiet dignity of a father who had every reason to be angry, yet chose grace instead. Noah looked toward Victoria and offered a small smile that carried the uncomplicated kindness only a child could give. That simple gesture seemed to lift an invisible weight from the room. As the meeting ended, employees stepped aside without being asked, creating a clear path toward the exit. No applause followed. No dramatic speeches were made. Respect no longer needed to announce itself. It revealed itself in quiet gestures, grateful eyes, and the understanding that true leadership begins the moment pride gives way to humility. As Ethan reached the main lobby with Noah walking beside him, the late afternoon sunlight streamed through the towering glass entrance, replacing the gray reflections of yesterday with a warm golden glow that filled the building with unexpected calm. The receptionist smiled respectfully as father and son passed her desk, and several employees who had once hurried past Ethan without noticing him now paused simply to wish him a pleasant evening. Ethan acknowledged each greeting with the same quiet kindness that had always defined him, never allowing praise to change the humility that had guided his life for years. Just as the automatic doors began to open, Victoria Sterling called his name from across the lobby. Ethan turned, surprised to see her walking toward him without assistants, board members, or security. She carried only a slim leather folder beneath one arm. "Would you give me a few more minutes?" she asked. Ethan looked toward Noah, who gave a small, encouraging nod. "Of course," Ethan replied. Minutes later, they gathered inside a smaller executive conference room overlooking Elliott Bay, where Daniel Brooks and Richard Hayes, the chairman of the board, were already waiting. Richard stood as Ethan entered and extended his hand warmly. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I wish we had met under different circumstances." Ethan accepted the handshake with quiet respect. Richard opened the folder before him. The board reviewed today's events immediately after the systems recovered. "We also reviewed your entire history with this company." He paused before continuing. The conclusion was unanimous. Victoria stepped forward. "Yesterday, I asked you to leave because I believed your value had diminished. Today, I understand that I underestimated not only your contribution, but also the culture you quietly built around you." Daniel added with a thoughtful smile, "Some people write software. Others build people. You somehow managed to do both." Richard slid a document across the table. "We would like to invite you back to Sterling Dynamics as Chief Systems Architect and Senior Technical Advisor. This position reports directly to both the Chief Technology Officer and the Chief Executive Officer, ensuring your experience helps guide every major technical decision from this point forward." Ethan looked at the offer without immediately touching it. The room remained silent as he carefully considered the proposal. Finally, he looked toward Victoria. "May I ask for 2 conditions?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "Anything that is reasonable." Ethan nodded. "First, every employee deserves to be heard before being judged, regardless of title, department, or years of experience. Good ideas do not always arrive from the loudest voices." Daniel immediately smiled. "I believe everyone in this room learned that lesson today." Ethan continued. "Second, I will always leave work in time to have dinner with my son. There will always be another meeting, another project, another deadline. Childhood does not wait." Noah lowered his eyes with a quiet smile, while Victoria looked at father and son with genuine admiration. "Both conditions are accepted," she said softly. "In fact, I believe they will make this company stronger." Richard signed the appointment letter before sliding it toward Ethan once more. This time, Ethan accepted the document. The handshake that followed carried no celebration of victory and no memory of defeat. It marked the beginning of mutual respect earned through honesty rather than authority. As the meeting ended, employees outside the conference room watched Ethan and Noah walk together toward the elevators again, But this time the atmosphere felt completely different. They were no longer watching a father leave after losing his job. They were watching a quiet man return without sacrificing the promise he had always considered more valuable than any executive office. The promise that every evening, no matter how successful his career became, his son would never wonder whether work mattered more than family. Several weeks passed, and the rhythm inside Sterling Dynamics gradually transformed into something no strategic plan could have predicted. The technical systems continued operating with remarkable stability, but the greatest improvement was no longer measured by performance charts or quarterly reports. It was reflected in the conversations that now filled meeting rooms where every voice was invited to contribute before decisions were made. Junior engineers no longer hesitated to ask thoughtful questions. Experienced employees listened more carefully before offering conclusions, and department leaders began measuring success not only by results, but also by the respect shown along the way. Daniel Brooks often smiled when he noticed a simple phrase appearing more frequently throughout the engineering floor. "Tell me what you see." It had quietly replaced the old habit of assuming that rank always carried the best answer. Ethan Walker returned to the office each morning with the same worn leather messenger bag and the same calm smile he had carried long before anyone knew the full story behind his work. His office remained surprisingly modest despite his new leadership position. There were no expensive decorations or impressive awards displayed on the shelves. Instead, the framed photograph of him and Noah standing beside the mountain lake occupied the center of his desk, exactly where it had always been. New employees often expected the company's most respected architect to speak the loudest during meetings, yet they quickly discovered that Ethan usually listened longer than anyone else. When difficult technical discussions reached an impasse, he rarely offered immediate solutions. Instead, he gently asked one simple question that encouraged everyone else to think more deeply. Little by little, the culture he had quietly lived for years became the culture the entire company embraced. Victoria Sterling changed as well. She continued leading Sterling Dynamics with determination, but those closest to her noticed a new habit. Before approving major decisions, she now asked managers to tell her something about the people behind the numbers. Productivity reports still mattered, but character mattered just as much. She had learned that spreadsheets could calculate revenue, yet they could never fully measure wisdom, loyalty, humility, or sacrifice. One afternoon, she passed the engineering floor and saw Noah visiting after school, sitting beside his father while working on a science project. Ethan patiently listened as his son explained an idea using another hand-drawn sketch filled with arrows and tiny boxes. Victoria smiled quietly without interrupting them. She realized that the greatest innovation inside the building was not a new technology. It was a relationship between a father who taught with patience and a son who learned with curiosity. Every evening, almost exactly at 5:30, Ethan closed his laptop regardless of how busy the day had been. At first, some employees found it surprising that one of the company's senior leaders always left on time. Soon they understood why. Noah was always waiting. Sometimes they stopped for hamburgers at a neighborhood diner. Sometimes they cooked dinner together at home. Sometimes they simply drove through Seattle talking about school, books, or the changing weather. Those ordinary moments became Ethan's greatest achievement because they were the moments he had protected through every promotion he declined and every difficult decision he had made. Late one autumn evening, Victoria stood alone beside the large windows of her office as she watched Ethan's old pickup truck leave the parking lot with Noah smiling in the passenger seat. The city lights reflected across the damp streets while the truck disappeared into the steady flow of evening traffic. She understood then that true success was never about becoming the richest person in the room or making the boldest decision at the conference table. True success was having the wisdom to recognize quiet dignity before it walked away, the humility to correct a mistake before pride made it permanent, and the courage to remember that the strongest foundation any person can build is not found inside a corporation, but inside the heart of a family that chooses love, respect, grace, and second chances every single day.